15-year-old Amara had been waiting for this day with a mix of fear and hope. For weeks, the pain in her side had grown worse, until doctors finally diagnosed her with appendicitis. Now she sat in the pre-op room at Metropolitan General Hospital, her hands fidgeting with the thin blanket covering her legs. "Everything will be fine, sweetheart," her mother Tanya said, squeezing her daughter's hand. "It's a routine procedure. The doctors here are excellent." Amara nodded, but her eyes betrayed her worry. At 15, she had never been hospitalized before, and the thought of being cut open even for a necessary surgery terrified her. The hospital room felt cold and impersonal, with its beeping machines and antiseptic smell. Her father, Robert, a tall man with kind eyes and a commanding presence, stood by the window. As one of the city's most respected attorneys specializing in civil rights cases, he normally exuded confidence. But today, watching his only daughter prepare for surgery, worry lines creased his forehead. "I wish I could stay until you wake up," Robert said, checking his watch with a frown. "This emergency meeting couldn't have come at a worse time." "It's okay, Dad," Amara replied, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Mom will be here and you'll come back as soon as you can, right?" Robert walked over and placed a gentle kiss on his daughter's forehead. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away. I'll be back before you even realize I'm gone." A nurse entered the room, clipboard in hand. "It's time to take Amara to the operating room," she announced with a reassuring smile. Tanya's eyes filled with tears as she hugged her daughter. "We'll be right here waiting for you, baby. Everything will be just fine." As they wheeled Amara down the hallway, she caught a final glimpse of her parents, her mother waving encouragingly, her father checking his phone with a distracted expression. She wanted to call out, to ask them not to leave, but the doors swung closed, cutting off her view. The operating room was even colder, with bright lights that made her squint. The surgical team moved around with practiced efficiency, their faces mostly hidden behind masks. "I'm Dr. Chen," said a woman with warm eyes above her mask. "I'll be performing your appendectomy today. Can you count backward from 10 for me, Amara?" As the anesthesiologist placed a mask over her face, Amara began counting. 10, 9, 8. The world began to blur around the edges. 7, 6. Her eyelids grew heavy, impossibly heavy. 5. The next thing Amara knew, she was waking up in a different room. Her mouth felt dry, her thoughts foggy. The sharp pain in her side had been replaced by a dull, throbbing ache. It took her a moment to realize she was in the recovery ward. "Mom?" she called out, her voice a raspy whisper, but the chair beside her bed was empty. A clock on the wall showed 4:30 p.m. The surgery had taken longer than expected. Through the window, she could see the afternoon sun beginning its descent. The recovery room had 6 beds, but only 3 were occupied, including hers. A curtain partially separated each space, offering a semblance of privacy. From somewhere in the hallway, Amara could hear voices, nurses chatting, equipment being wheeled past, the general hum of hospital activity, but no one came into her room, not even when the pain in her abdomen began to intensify. On the bedside table, Amara spotted a small button attached to a cord, the call button for summoning help. As the pain grew sharper, she pressed it, then waited. 1 minute passed, then 5. No one came. She pressed it again, holding it down longer this time. Still no response. "Hello?" she called out, her voice stronger now but strained with pain. "Can someone help me, please?" From beyond the curtain, an older woman in the next bed looked over sympathetically. "They're short-staffed today, dear. Sometimes it takes a while." Amara nodded, biting her lip as another wave of pain washed over her. The doctors had explained that she would be uncomfortable after surgery, but this felt worse than expected. Where was her mother? Where was the nursing staff? After what seemed like an eternity but was actually 15 minutes, the curtain was pulled back abruptly. A nurse with short blonde hair and tired eyes stood there, arms crossed. "Did you need something?" she asked, her tone suggesting that whatever Amara needed was an inconvenience. "I'm in a lot of pain," Amara explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "The doctor said I would have medication." The nurse, her name tag read Patricia Winters, barely glanced at Amara's chart. "You had your medication an hour ago. You shouldn't be feeling that much pain if you're taking it correctly." Amara frowned in confusion. "But I just woke up. I haven't had any pain medication yet." Nurse Winters sighed heavily, as if dealing with a particularly difficult child. I'll check your chart again, but I'm pretty sure you're mistaken. She flipped through the papers, then paused. Something in her expression changed. A slight hardening around the eyes, a tightening of her mouth. I'll be back, she said curtly, turning to leave. Wait, Amara called after her. Can I have some water at least? My mouth is really dry. The nurse paused at the doorway. I'll send someone, she said without turning around. Then she was gone. 20 minutes passed. No one brought water. No one came with pain medication. Amara pressed the call button again, feeling increasingly desperate as the pain sharpened. When Nurse Winters finally returned, she carried a small paper cup with pills and a tiny plastic cup of water. Here, she said, placing them on the tray table with such force that some water sloshed over the edge. These should help with the discomfort. Don't press the call button unless it's an emergency. We're very busy today. Before Amara could even thank her or ask a question, the nurse was gone again. Amara stared at the pills, wondering if she should take them without knowing what they were. Her mother had always taught her to ask questions about her medications. But the pain was becoming unbearable, so she swallowed them down with the meager amount of water. In the adjacent room, she could hear Nurse Winters speaking to another patient, an older white woman who had apparently had gallbladder surgery. How are you feeling, Mrs. Davidson? Nurse Winters asked, her voice suddenly warm and solicitous. Is there anything else I can get you? Another blanket? Some ice chips for your dry mouth? The contrast in treatment was so stark that Amara wondered if she had imagined the nurse's coldness toward her. Maybe Nurse Winters was just having a bad day, and her interaction with Amara had caught her at a bad moment. But as the afternoon wore on, a pattern emerged. Nurse Winters checked on the other patients frequently, chatting, adjusting pillows, offering comfort. When she came to Amara's bedside, her visits were brief and perfunctory. She avoided eye contact and responded to questions with one-word answers or not at all. When Tanya finally returned from the cafeteria, she found her daughter curled on her side, tears streaming down her face. Amara, what's wrong? Are you in pain? Tanya rushed to the bedside, alarm written across her features. Mom, where were you? Amara asked through her tears. The surgery took longer than expected, and Dr. Chen wanted to speak with me afterward. Then I thought you'd be asleep for another hour, so I went to get some food. Tanya's explanation trailed off as she noticed her daughter's distress. What happened? Aren't they giving you pain medication? The nurse? She doesn't like me, Amara whispered, feeling childish even as she said it. She barely checks on me, and she took forever to bring medicine. And she's so nice to everyone else. Tanya's expression darkened. Which nurse? Her name tag says Winters. Tanya immediately pressed the call button. When no one came after 10 minutes, she walked to the nurse's station herself, her back straight, her expression determined. From her bed, Amara could hear her mother's voice, firm but controlled, asking to speak with Nurse Winters or the charge nurse. When Tanya returned, she had a different nurse with her, a young man with a compassionate smile. Hi, Amara. I'm Nurse David. I'll be checking on you for the rest of the evening, he said, immediately reviewing her chart and vital signs. Your mom tells me you're in quite a bit of pain. Let's see what we can do about that. As Nurse David adjusted her medication and brought fresh water, Amara felt herself relaxing slightly. But she couldn't forget the way Nurse Winters had looked at her, as if she were somehow less deserving of care and compassion than the other patients. Mom, she said quietly after Nurse David had left. I think she treated me that way because I'm black. Tanya sat perfectly still for a moment, then took her daughter's hand. Tell me everything that happened from the beginning. Don't leave anything out. As Amara recounted the afternoon's events, her mother's expression grew increasingly troubled. They both looked up as the door opened, expecting to see Nurse David returning. Instead, Robert walked in, his tall frame filling the doorway. There are my girls, he said with a warm smile that quickly faded when he saw their faces. What's wrong? Amara, are you in more pain? Tanya and Amara exchanged a look. They had not expected him back so soon, but his timing couldn't have been better. You need to hear this, Tanya said, her voice steady but tinged with anger. Our daughter has something important to tell you about her care today. Robert set down his briefcase and coat, pulled up a chair, and took his daughter's other hand. I'm listening, sweetheart. Tell me everything. As Amara began speaking, none of them noticed Nurse Winters passing by the room, pausing briefly to glance inside with narrowed eyes before continue. would change everything at Metropolitan General Hospital was now inevitable, set in motion by one nurse's prejudice and one family's refusal to accept discrimination in any form. The pain medication that Nurse David had given Amara was finally working. The sharp, stabbing sensation in her side had dulled to a manageable ache, and for the first time since waking from surgery, she felt like she could breathe normally. The hospital room was quiet now, the evening shadows growing longer as sunset approached. "I should get some rest," Amara told her parents. "You guys don't have to stay all night." "I'm not going anywhere," Tanya said firmly, arranging her purse and jacket on the small couch beneath the window. "Your father can go home and get some sleep since he has that big case tomorrow, but I'm staying right here." Robert nodded, though reluctance showed in his eyes. "I'll be back first thing in the morning," he promised, kissing his daughter's forehead. "Call me if anything happens. Anything at all." After her father left, Amara drifted off to sleep, comforted by her mother's presence. The hospital grew quieter as night fell, with only the occasional squeak of rubber-soled shoes in the hallway or the distant ding of an elevator breaking the silence. Amara woke suddenly around 2 a.m. disoriented and in pain again. The medication had worn off. Her mother was asleep on the couch, her breathing deep and even. Not wanting to wake her, Amara reached for the call button herself. 10 minutes passed. No response. She pressed it again. After 15 minutes, the door opened. Nurse Winters stood there, her face set in lines of irritation. "What is it now?" she asked, her voice pitched low but sharp enough to make Amara flinch. "My pain medication. I think it's worn off," Amara explained, trying to keep her own voice steady. "Nurse David said I could have more after 4 hours, and it's been almost 6. Nurse Winters approached the bed and checked the chart hanging at its foot, her movements brusque. "You young people have no pain tolerance these days," she muttered, just loud enough for Amara to hear. "Always wanting more drugs for the slightest discomfort." Amara stared at her, shocked by the accusation. "I had surgery," she said. "The doctor said pain is normal and I should ask for medication if I need it." Nurse Winters glanced at Tanya's sleeping form on the couch, then leaned closer to Amara. "Listen," she said, her voice even lower now. "I've been a nurse for 22 years. I know when patients are exaggerating for attention. You're not the first and you won't be the last." "I'm not exaggerating," Amara protested, tears springing to her eyes. "It really hurts." "I'll check what you're allowed to have," Nurse Winters replied, her tone making it clear she didn't believe a word. "But don't keep pressing that button all night. There are patients with real emergencies who need attention." As the nurse turned to leave, Amara noticed something on her uniform. A small pin with what looked like a Confederate flag partially covered by her ID badge. The sight made her blood run cold. When Nurse Winters returned 10 minutes later with pain medication, her manner was slightly more professional, probably because Tanya had woken up and was watching her intently. "Here's your medication," she said, handing Amara the pills and water. "This should last until morning." "Thank you," Amara replied automatically, though gratitude was the last thing she felt. As soon as the nurse left, Tanya moved to her daughter's bedside. "What was that about?" she asked. "Did she say something to you?" Amara hesitated, not wanting to upset her mother, but the words tumbled out anyway. "She thinks I'm faking it," she said quietly. "She said I have no pain tolerance and I'm just looking for attention." "And Mom? She has a Confederate flag pin on her uniform. It's small and she keeps it half hidden, but I saw it." Tanya's expression hardened. "Are you sure about the pin?" "Yes," Amara said. "It was definitely a Confederate flag." Tanya pulled out her phone and began typing notes. "I'm documenting everything," she explained. "Times, dates, exactly what was said and done. Robert will want all the details. Are you going to tell Dad?" "Absolutely. But first I'm going to speak with the charge nurse in the morning." This is completely unacceptable. Despite the pain medication, Amara slept fitfully for the rest of the night. Whenever Nurse Winters came to check her vital signs, her touch was rough, her manner cold. Once, when checking Amara's surgical site, she pressed down unnecessarily hard, causing Amara to gasp in pain. "Sorry," Nurse Winters said, not sounding sorry at all. "Need to make sure there's no infection." By morning, Amara was exhausted, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes. When Dr. Chen came for morning rounds, she immediately noticed her patient's condition. "You look like you've had a rough night," she said, concern evident in her voice. "How's your pain level?" Before Amara could answer, Nurse Winters jumped in. She's been managing well. Vital signs stable, surgical site looks good. Dr. Chen looked from the nurse to her patient, noting the discrepancy between the report and what she could see with her own eyes. Amara? She prompted. How are you really feeling? Not great, Amara admitted. The pain gets really bad between doses of medication, and I didn't sleep much. Dr. Chen frowned and adjusted her pain management plan, ordering stronger medication at more frequent intervals. As she wrote in the chart, she gave Nurse Winters a questioning look but said nothing in front of the patient. After the doctor left, Nurse Winters' attitude toward Amara grew even colder. For the rest of her shift, she avoided entering the room unless absolutely necessary, and when she did, she spoke only to Tanya, as if Amara weren't there at all. Around noon, a young hospital orderly named Luis came in to change Amara's water pitcher. He worked quickly but efficiently, offering a kind smile as he went about his tasks. Is there anything else you need? He asked before leaving. Actually, Amara said, could I have some ice chips? My throat is still sore from the breathing tube during surgery. Of course, Luis replied. I'll be right back with those. When he returned with the ice, he glanced around to make sure no one else was nearby. I couldn't help noticing that Nurse Winters doesn't seem very friendly toward you, he said quietly. She's not like that with everyone, you know. Tanya, who had been organizing Amara's get-well cards on the windowsill, turned to listen. What do you mean? Amara asked. Luis shifted uncomfortably. Look, I shouldn't be saying anything. I could get in trouble. But I've been working here for 8 months and I've seen how she treats certain patients differently. Patients who look like my daughter? Tanya asked directly. Luis nodded, his eyes downcast. It's not right. Most of the staff here are amazing people who treat everyone with respect. But Nurse Winters, she has issues. I've heard her say things when she thinks no one's listening. What kind of things? Tanya pressed, taking out her phone again. Racist things, Luis admitted. Comments about those people taking advantage of the system. Complaints about having to treat them at all. Some of the other nurses have complained to management, but she's been here forever and nothing ever happens. Would you be willing to tell this to hospital administration? Tanya asked. Or provide a written statement? Luis hesitated, clearly torn. I need this job, he said finally. I'm putting myself through nursing school, but... He paused, looking at Amara. What she's doing isn't right. If there's an official investigation and I'm asked directly, I'll tell the truth. As Luis left, Amara and her mother exchanged a look of grim determination. That confirms it, Tanya said. This isn't just a misunderstanding or a nurse having a bad day. This is a pattern of discriminatory behavior. What are we going to do? Amara asked. Wait for your father, Tanya replied, her voice steady. He'll know exactly how to handle this. Throughout the afternoon, Amara's condition improved somewhat thanks to Dr. Chen's new pain management plan. The new nurse who took over after Nurse Winters' shift ended was attentive and professional, checking on Amara regularly and responding promptly to the call button. The contrast was striking, highlighting just how substandard Nurse Winters' care had been. Tanya continued documenting everything, taking photos of Amara's medication chart, which showed long gaps during winter shifts when pain medication was due but not administered. Around 4 p.m., another nurse came in to check on Amara. Her name tag read Nurse Michelle Johnson. After reviewing the chart, she frowned. You should have received pain medication at 2 p.m., she said. It's marked as given, but that can't be right because the medication wasn't even dispensed from the pharmacy until 3:30. Tanya looked up sharply. Are you saying someone falsified my daughter's medical chart? Nurse Johnson looked uncomfortable. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, she said carefully. But there's definitely a discrepancy here that needs to be addressed. I'll make a note of it and speak with my supervisor. Please do, Tanya replied, and we'd appreciate a copy of the complete medical record before my daughter is discharged. As Nurse Johnson left, Amara turned to her mother. Do you think Nurse Winters lied about giving me medicine? It certainly looks that way, Tanya said, her voice tight with anger. She marked it as given when it wasn't, which means she was deliberately withholding your pain medication while claiming she had administered it. That's not just discriminatory, it's dangerous and potentially illegal. The implications were chilling. A healthcare professional entrusted with Amara's well-being had not only treated her with disdain because of her race, but had actively falsified medical records and withheld necessary care. It was a serious breach of medical ethics and a violation of patient trust. As evening approached, Amara's phone chimed with a text message from her father. "On my way. Got held up in court. Be there in 30 minutes. "Dad's coming," she told her mother, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. Throughout her life, her father had been her strongest advocate, the person who taught her to stand up for herself and for what was right. If anyone could address the situation properly, it was him. While they waited, Amara and Tanya watched the local news on the small television mounted in the corner of the room. A story came on about a protest at a nearby hospital, where a black patient had died allegedly due to inadequate care. The parallels were unsettling. "It happens all the time," Tanya said quietly. "Studies show black patients receive less pain medication, are taken less seriously when they report symptoms, and have worse outcomes for the same conditions. Most healthcare workers are dedicated professionals who treat everyone equally, but it only takes a few with biases to cause real harm." "Like Nurse Winters," Amara said. "Like Nurse Winters," her mother agreed. "But the difference is we're not letting this slide. We have evidence, we have witnesses, and we have your father, who knows exactly how to make sure this kind of behavior has consequences." The door to Amara's room opened, and Robert walked in, still dressed in his court attire, a perfectly tailored suit, crisp white shirt, and patterned tie. His normally smiling face was serious as he took in the scene. His daughter in the hospital bed, his wife sitting beside her with a notebook full of notes and a phone full of evidence. "Tell me everything," he said, setting down his briefcase, "and don't leave out a single detail." As Tanya and Amara took turns explaining what had happened over the past 24 hours, Robert's expression grew increasingly grave. When they mentioned the Confederate flag pin, his jaw tightened noticeably. When they described the falsified medication records, he began taking his own notes. "We're going to handle this," he said when they had finished, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of tightly controlled anger. "Not just for you, Amara, but for every patient who might encounter Nurse Winters in the future. This stops now." He took out his phone and made a call. "Hello, this is Robert Johnson. I need to speak with the hospital administrator immediately regarding a serious patient care issue." He paused, listening. "Yes, I understand it's after hours. This can't wait until morning. It involves falsification of medical records and discriminatory treatment." Another pause. "Thank you. I'll hold." Amara watched her father, drawing strength from his steady presence. She had always known in an abstract way that racism existed in the world. Her parents had prepared her for that reality, teaching her about her rights and her worth. But experiencing it firsthand, in a hospital where she was vulnerable and in pain, had shaken her in ways she hadn't expected. As her father continued his phone conversation, arranging for an immediate meeting with hospital leadership, Amara realized that this experience, painful as it was, had shown her something important: the power of documentation, of speaking up, and of having advocates who believed her and knew how to navigate the system. Nurse Winters had made a critical mistake. She had chosen the wrong patient to mistreat, a young woman whose parents had raised her to recognize injustice and whose father had dedicated his life to fighting it. Whatever happened next, Amara knew this. Nurse Winters was about to face the consequences of her actions, and Metropolitan General Hospital would never be the same. The hospital administrator, a woman named Dr. Victoria Reynolds, arrived at Amara's room within 30 minutes of Robert's call. She was dressed in a casual blazer over jeans, clearly having been called in from home, but her demeanor was entirely professional as she introduced herself. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I understand you have serious concerns about your daughter's care," she said, her voice calm but concerned. "I want you to know that Metropolitan General takes patient complaints very seriously, especially ones involving potential discrimination or improper care." Robert nodded, gesturing toward the chairs by the window. "We appreciate you coming in so quickly, Dr. Reynolds. What we're dealing with here isn't just a misunderstanding or a one-time incident. It's a pattern of behavior that put my daughter at risk." As they settled into the chairs, Tanya positioned herself protectively beside Amara's bed. The teenager was feeling better physically thanks to the proper pain management implemented by the evening shift nurses. But emotionally, she was still shaken by her treatment. "Before we begin," Dr. Reynolds said, opening a notebook, "I want to emphasize that patient safety is our absolute priority. Whatever you tell me will be thoroughly investigated. She turned to Amara with a gentle smile. And Amara, I want to hear directly from you about your experience. Your perspective matters most in this situation. For the next 45 minutes, Amara, Tanya, and Robert took turns explaining everything that had happened since Amara woke from surgery. Dr. Reynolds listened intently, taking detailed notes and asking clarifying questions without being defensive or dismissive. When they mentioned the Confederate flag pin, her eyebrows rose in surprise and concern. That is absolutely against hospital policy, she said firmly. Political symbols of any kind are not permitted on uniforms, and symbols associated with hate or discrimination are explicitly prohibited. When they described how Nurse Winters had marked pain medication as administered when it hadn't even been dispensed, Dr. Reynolds' expression grew grave. Falsification of medical records is a serious offense that could result in loss of nursing license, she explained. That allegation alone warrants immediate investigation. We have evidence, Tanya said, pulling out her phone. I've documented everything, times, dates, witnesses, photos of the medication chart showing the discrepancies. She handed the phone to Dr. Reynolds, who scrolled through the evidence with growing concern. Mrs. Johnson, you've been incredibly thorough, she said, returning the phone. Would you be willing to email these photos and notes to me for the official investigation? Of course, Tanya replied. I'll send everything tonight. There's more, Robert added, his voice measured and calm despite the anger he clearly felt. We've spoken with a staff member, an orderly named Luis, who confirmed that Nurse Winters has a history of treating patients of color differently. He indicated that other staff members have complained about this behavior in the past, but no action was taken. Dr. Reynolds frowned, making another note. I'll need to look into that. If previous complaints weren't properly addressed, that represents a serious failure in our accountability systems. We're also aware, Robert continued, that another nurse, Michelle Johnson, discovered the discrepancy in the medication records and reported it to her supervisor. We'd like to know who that supervisor is and whether this information was passed up the chain of command. I'll find out, Dr. Reynolds promised. Now I understand you're an attorney, Mr. Johnson. I want to be completely transparent about what happens next, both from a medical and administrative perspective. Robert appreciated her directness. Thank you. That's exactly what we want. Transparency and accountability. First, Dr. Reynolds said, I'll be placing Nurse Winters on administrative leave effective immediately, pending a full investigation. She will not be providing care to any patients while this process is underway. Amara visibly relaxed at this news, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Second, I'll be assembling an investigative team that includes representatives from Nursing Administration, Human Resources, our Diversity and Inclusion Office, and our Patient Advocacy Department. This team will review all evidence, interview staff members, and examine Nurse Winters' personnel file, including any previous complaints. How long will this process take? Tanya asked. For something this serious, we move quickly, Dr. Reynolds assured her. The initial investigation should be completed within 2 weeks. If the allegations are substantiated, and based on what you've shared, I have serious concerns that they will be, appropriate disciplinary action will follow. And what might that entail? Robert pressed. Dr. Reynolds met his gaze directly. In cases involving falsification of medical records or discriminatory patient care, termination is certainly on the table. We also have an obligation to report substantiated misconduct to the State Nursing Board, which could affect her license to practice. She turned to Amara. Most importantly, we want to ensure that you receive excellent care for the remainder of your stay. I'll personally check in with your new nurses to make sure all your needs are being met appropriately. Amara nodded, grateful for the administrator's concern. Thank you. The nurses I have now, Nurse David and Nurse Johnson, have been really good. They're excellent nurses, Dr. Reynolds agreed. Both have received recognition for outstanding patient care. As their meeting concluded, Dr. Reynolds handed each of them her business card. Please contact me directly if you have any additional concerns or remember any details you'd like to add to your report. And Amara, I hope your recovery continues to go smoothly. After she left, the family sat in silence for a moment, processing everything that had happened. Do you think anything will really change? Amara finally asked, her voice small. Robert took his daughter's hand. Yes, I do. Dr. Reynolds seems genuinely concerned and committed to addressing this properly. And if the hospital doesn't follow through, we have options. Like what? Amara asked. Like filing a formal complaint with the state medical board, Tanya explained, or pursuing legal action if necessary. But I don't think it will come to that, Robert added. Based on Dr. Reynolds' response and the seriousness of the allegations, especially the falsified records, I believe the hospital will handle this appropriately. Amara nodded, feeling a mix of emotions, relief that she was being taken seriously, sadness that such discrimination existed in the first place, and a new determination to speak up when she witnessed injustice. You did the right thing by telling us what was happening, Tanya said, smoothing her daughter's hair back from her forehead. Never doubt that. I almost didn't, Amara admitted. I thought maybe I was imagining things or being too sensitive. That's what people like Nurse Winters count on, Robert said quietly. They rely on patients being too uncertain or too intimidated to speak up. But you did speak up, and now other patients will be protected because of your courage. The next morning brought a noticeable change in the atmosphere. Word had clearly spread among the hospital staff that a serious complaint had been filed. The nurses and technicians who came to check on Amara were unfailingly professional and kind, explaining each procedure and medication in detail. Dr. Chen arrived for morning rounds with a concerned expression. After examining Amara's surgical site and checking her vital signs, she pulled up a chair. I owe you an apology, she said directly. I noticed yesterday morning that you seemed to be in more pain than expected, but I didn't follow up adequately to find out why. As your doctor, I should have investigated more thoroughly. It's not your fault, Amara said, surprised by the apology. Actually, it is my responsibility, Dr. Chen insisted. I'm the physician overseeing your care, which means I'm accountable for everything that happens to you in this hospital. I should have recognized that something wasn't right and addressed it immediately. Her candor was refreshing. Unlike many professionals who might be defensive or evasive when confronted with a mistake, Dr. Chen acknowledged her oversight directly and took responsibility for it. What matters now, she continued, is making sure you recover fully, both physically and emotionally, from your surgery and from this unfortunate experience. How are you feeling today? Better, Amara said honestly. The pain is more manageable and I'm not as tired. Good. I think we can start talking about discharge planning. Barring any complications, you should be able to go home tomorrow. As Dr. Chen left, Luis, the young orderly, entered with a breakfast tray. He smiled at Amara but seemed nervous, his eyes darting around the room. I heard what happened, he said quietly as he set up the tray. About the investigation, I mean. Are you okay? Tanya asked, noting his anxiety. Yeah, just a little nervous. The nursing director wants to speak with me today. I guess they're interviewing everyone who works with Nurse Winters. You don't have to worry, Robert assured him. Just tell the truth about what you've observed. You're protected by whistleblower laws and Dr. Reynolds seems committed to handling this properly. Luis nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. It's just, she's been here for decades. She has friends in management. Some people are saying this will all blow over like the other complaints did. Not this time, Robert said firmly. This situation is different. There's concrete evidence of falsified medical records, which is a serious offense, and we're not going to let this be swept under the rug. Louis seemed reassured by Robert's confidence. I hope you're right. Patients deserve better than what she's been doing. Throughout the day, Amara received several visitors that lifted her spirits. Her best friend Zoe brought homework assignments and gossip from school. Her grandmother arrived with homemade soup, insisting that hospital food wouldn't help anyone heal properly. Even her science teacher, Mr. Wallace, stopped by briefly with a card signed by her classmates. In the early afternoon, Nurse Michelle Johnson came to check Amara's vital signs. After completing her assessment, she hesitated by the door. I wanted you to know, she said, turning back to face the family, that many of us have been concerned about Nurse Winters' behavior for some time. Some nurses have tried to report incidents in the past, but nothing seemed to change. Why do you think that is? Robert asked. Nurse Johnson sighed. She's been here since the hospital opened. She's friends with several people in administration, and honestly, the complaints were always handled informally, verbal warnings at most. But what happened with Amara? Falsifying medication records crosses a line that can't be ignored. Have you spoken with the investigators yet? Tanya asked. I have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow, Nurse Johnson replied. I plan to be completely honest about what I've observed over the years. After she left, Robert turned to his wife and daughter with a thoughtful expression. It sounds like this is a systemic problem that goes beyond one nurse. The hospital needs better procedures for handling complaints of discrimination and following up on patterns of behavior. Do you think they'll make those kinds of changes? Amara asked. They might, Robert said, especially if they realize the alternative could be a lawsuit that would not only cost them financially, but damage their reputation in the community. By evening, Amara was feeling well enough to take a short walk around the floor, supported by her parents. As they passed the nurses' station, they overheard snippets of conversation. Administrative leave. Effective immediately. Never seen them act so quickly. About time someone stood up to her. The hospital grapevine was clearly active, spreading news of Nurse Winter's removal and the ongoing investigation. Some staff members looked up as Amara passed, offering encouraging smiles or nods of support. Back in her room, as darkness fell outside the windows, Amara felt a sense of cautious optimism. The worst of her ordeal, both the surgery and the discriminatory treatment, was behind her. Tomorrow she would likely go home to recover in comfort, and something positive might come from her negative experience. A hospital environment where all patients received equal care and respect. As her parents prepared to leave for the night, her mother to get some proper rest at home, her father to prepare for tomorrow's legal proceedings, Amara reflected on everything that had happened. I never want anyone else to go through what I did, she said suddenly. Her parents paused, looking at her with questioning expressions. I don't just want Nurse Winters to be fired, Amara clarified. I want things to actually change here. I want the hospital to do better for everyone. Robert nodded, a proud smile spreading across his face. That's exactly what we're going to push for, sweetheart. Not just consequences for one person, but systemic changes that protect all patients. How can we make sure that happens? Amara asked. Well, her father said, sitting on the edge of her bed, once the initial investigation is complete, we'll request a meeting with hospital leadership to discuss broader reforms. Better training for staff on recognizing and addressing bias, stronger procedures for handling complaints, and regular audits to ensure equal treatment for all patients. And if they don't agree, Amara pressed. Then we consider other options, Robert said, including making this situation public, which no hospital wants. But based on Dr. Reynolds' response so far, I think they'll be open to making meaningful changes. As her parents said goodnight and left for the evening, Amara settled back against her pillows, feeling strangely empowered despite the circumstances. What had begun as a routine appendectomy had turned into something much more significant. A challenge to long-standing discrimination that had gone unchecked for too long. She drifted off to sleep thinking about the young orderly Luis and Nurse Michelle Johnson and all the other healthcare workers who had recognized the injustice but hadn't been able to effect change on their own. Sometimes it took an outsider, someone like her father, with knowledge of the legal system and a deep commitment to equality, to help break through entrenched patterns of behavior. Tomorrow would bring her discharge from the hospital, but it would also mark the beginning of a new chapter, the push for accountability and reform that might ultimately benefit countless future patients who would never know her name or her story. As Amara slept, Dr. Reynolds sat in her office across the hospital campus, reviewing personnel files and previous complaint records by the glow of her desk lamp. What she was finding troubled her deeply. A pattern of complaints against Nurse Winters stretching back years, each handled inadequately, each eventually buried under bureaucracy and professional connections. The administrator reached for her phone and dialed a number, despite the late hour. Mark, she said when her colleague answered, we have a serious situation that needs immediate attention. I need the board to convene an emergency meeting tomorrow. This isn't just about one nurse or one incident anymore. We're looking at a systemic failure that requires comprehensive reform. The wheels of change had begun to turn, set in motion by one family's refusal to accept discrimination as inevitable. AFA. Merely headed by an attorney who understood not just how to identify injustice, but how to challenge it effectively within the system. Robert arrived at Metropolitan General Hospital early the next morning, well before visiting hours officially began. He was dressed not in his usual courtroom attire, but in a more casual blazer and slacks. Professional enough to command respect, but not so formal as to seem intimidating. He carried a leather portfolio containing carefully organized documents, printed copies of Tanya's photographs and notes, a timeline of events, and a list of specific concerns he wanted addressed. The hospital was quiet at this hour, the hallways mostly empty except for staff changing shifts. At the front desk, a tired-looking receptionist looked up in surprise when Robert requested a meeting with both Dr. Reynolds and the hospital's legal counsel. "Sir, administration doesn't open until 9 a.m., she explained. "I understand," Robert replied with a polite but firm smile, "but I believe Dr. Reynolds is already here. She mentioned an early board meeting when we spoke yesterday. Would you please call her office?" His confidence and calm demeanor worked in his favor. The receptionist made the call, and within minutes, a message came back that Dr. Reynolds would meet with him in the small conference room near her office. As Robert walked through the hospital corridors, he noticed details he'd been too preoccupied to see before. The diversity of the patient population reflected in the faces he passed. The varying quality of rooms depending on which floor and wing they were in, the subtle differences in how staff interacted with different types of patients. His legal training had taught him to observe patterns, to look beyond individual incidents to the systems that enabled them, and what he saw confirmed his suspicions. The problem at Metropolitan General went deeper than one prejudiced nurse. Dr. Reynolds was waiting for him in the conference room, along with a serious-looking man in a gray suit whom she introduced as Alan Parker, the hospital's chief legal counsel. "Thank you for meeting with me on such short notice," Robert said, taking a seat across from them. "I know you're both busy, especially with the investigation underway." "Your concerns take priority, Mr. Johnson," Dr. Reynolds assured him. "How is Amara doing this morning?" "I understand she's scheduled for discharge today." "She's doing better, thank you. The proper pain management has made a significant difference." Robert opened his portfolio and laid out several documents on the table. "I wanted to meet with you both before things progress further because I think we have an opportunity here. Not just to address a single incident, but to implement meaningful changes that could benefit all patients." Alan Parker leaned forward slightly, his expression guarded. As the hospital's legal counsel, he was undoubtedly assessing risk and liability. "We appreciate your perspective, Mr. Johnson. Dr. Reynolds has briefed me on the situation, and I want to assure you that we're taking the allegations very seriously." "I'm glad to hear that," Robert replied. "But before we discuss next steps, I'd like to understand something. Based on conversations with several staff members, it appears that concerns about Nurse Winter's behavior have been raised in the past, but no substantive action was taken. Can you help me understand why?" Dr. Reynolds and Alan Parker exchanged glances. It was Dr. Reynolds who answered. "After reviewing personnel records yesterday evening, I discovered that there have indeed been verbal complaints about Nurse Winters over the years. However, they were handled informally and inconsistently. Some were documented only in meeting notes rather than formal complaints. Others were addressed with verbal warnings that weren't properly recorded in her file. In other words," Robert said carefully, "the hospital lacked a standardized procedure for documenting, investigating, and addressing discrimination complaints." "That's correct," Dr. Reynolds admitted, "and it's something I've already discussed with the board this morning. We recognize this as a serious gap in our policies." Alan Parker cleared his throat. "Mr. Johnson, as I'm sure you understand from your legal background, the hospital is committed to addressing this matter thoroughly, while also managing potential liability concerns. May I ask what outcome you and your family are seeking?" It was a carefully worded question, clearly aimed at assessing whether Robert was planning to file a lawsuit. Instead of responding directly, Robert spread out several documents on the table. "What we want is systemic change," he said, indicating the papers. "I've outlined several specific recommendations here, based on best practices at other hospitals and healthcare systems." Dr. Reynolds pulled the documents closer, examining them with interest. "First," Robert continued, "a comprehensive anti-bias training program for all staff, from physicians to orderlies with regular refresher courses. Second, a clear, accessible system for patients to report discriminatory treatment, with multiple reporting channels to ensure complaints don't get buried. Third, Transparent investigation procedures with specific timelines and accountability measures. Fourth, regular audits of patient outcomes and satisfaction scores, broken down by race, ethnicity, gender, and other demographic factors, to identify potential disparities. As he spoke, Dr. Reynolds nodded, making notes in the margin of his document. And fifth, Robert concluded, a diverse patient advocacy board with real authority to recommend policy changes and monitor implementation. Alan Parker looked surprised. These are quite detailed recommendations, Mr. Johnson. I've been working on civil rights cases for 15 years, Robert replied. I've seen what works and what doesn't when institutions try to address systemic discrimination. Half measures rarely lead to meaningful change. And if we implement these recommendations, Alan Parker asked, the unspoken question clear, would that satisfy the Johnson family? Would it prevent a lawsuit? Robert met his gaze directly. If Metropolitan General commits to implementing these changes, not just on paper but in practice, and if appropriate action is taken regarding Nurse Winters, then yes, we would consider that a satisfactory resolution. Dr. Reynolds looked relieved, but also genuinely engaged with the proposals. These recommendations align well with initiatives I've been hoping to implement since taking this position 6 months ago. The board has been resistant to some changes, citing budgetary concerns, but this situation provides compelling evidence that we can't afford not to make these improvements. Exactly, Robert agreed. And while I'm not here to threaten legal action, I think we all understand that addressing these issues proactively is far less costly, both financially and reputationally, than responding to a discrimination lawsuit or negative media attention. Alan Parker nodded reluctantly, acknowledging the point. I'll need to review these recommendations in detail and discuss them with the board. But speaking unofficially, I believe there would be support for most, if not all, of these measures. That's good to hear, Robert said. Now, regarding Nurse Winters specifically, where does the investigation stand? We've interviewed 7 staff members so far, Dr. Reynolds replied. All have corroborated aspects of your daughter's account, particularly regarding Nurse Winters' differential treatment of patients based on race. The medication discrepancy has been confirmed through pharmacy records, and the Confederate flag pin was found in her locker during a standard search of personal belongings, which is conducted whenever serious allegations arise. And her response to these allegations? Robert asked. She denies any discriminatory intent, Dr. Reynolds said. She claims the medication discrepancy was a charting error, not deliberate falsification. As for the pin, she says it's a heritage symbol, not a racist one. Robert raised an eyebrow but didn't comment on these predictable defenses. What's the timeline for completing the investigation? We should have all interviews completed by the end of the week, Dr. Reynolds said. The review board will meet early next week to make a final determination and recommend appropriate action. I'd like to request that my family be informed of the outcome, Robert said. Not just whether Nurse Winters faces consequences, but also what specific steps the hospital will take to prevent similar incidents in the future. That's reasonable, Dr. Reynolds agreed. I'll arrange a follow-up meeting once the process is complete. As the meeting concluded, Robert felt cautiously optimistic. Both hospital representatives seemed genuinely committed to addressing the issues, albeit for different reasons. Dr. Reynolds out of a sincere desire to improve patient care, Alan Parker primarily to mitigate legal and PR risks. But regardless of motivation, the result could be meaningful change that would benefit countless future patients. When Robert arrived at Amara's room, he found her sitting up in bed, already dressed in comfortable clothes for the journey home. Tanya was packing up the cards, flowers, and personal items that had accumulated during her stay. How did your meeting go? Tanya asked, noting her husband's positive expression. Better than expected, Robert replied. I think the hospital is genuinely ready to make changes. Dr. Reynolds is actually an ally. She's been wanting to implement better policies, but has faced resistance from the board. This situation might give her the leverage she needs. And Nurse Winters? Amara asked quietly. The investigation is ongoing, but the evidence against her is strong. I don't think she'll be in a position to treat patients unfairly again. At least not at this hospital. Amara nodded, relief visible in her posture. Good. I keep thinking about other kids like me who might have been treated the same way but didn't have parents who could do what you guys did. That's exactly why we're pushing for systemic changes. Not just consequences for one individual, Robert explained, so that all patients are protected, regardless of whether they have advocates. Dr. Chen arrived then with discharge papers and final instructions. Your recovery is going very well, Amara, she said, examining the surgical site one last time. Keep the incision clean and dry. Take your antibiotics as prescribed, and rest for at least another week before returning to school. As she handed over the prescriptions and care instructions, she hesitated. I want you to know that what happened here has already sparked important conversations among the medical staff. Several of us are forming a committee to review our practices and identify ways to ensure more equitable care for all patients. That's good to hear, Tanya said. Institutional change has to come from within as well as from external pressure. As they prepared to leave, a knock at the door revealed Luis, the young orderly who had been so helpful. He looked nervous but determined. I just wanted to say goodbye, he told Amara, and to thank your family. I testified in the investigation yesterday, told them everything I've seen over the past 8 months. It was scary, but it felt right. Thank you for your courage, Robert said, shaking the young man's hand. Witnesses like you make all the difference in cases like this. It's already making a difference, Louis said. People are talking more openly about things they've observed. It's like a dam broke, and now everyone feels they can speak up about problems they've seen. As they left the hospital, Amara walking slowly between her parents, she felt a complex mix of emotions. The physical pain of surgery was fading, and with proper medication it was manageable. The emotional impact of discrimination, the feeling of being devalued, disbelieved, and mistreated because of her race, would take longer to heal. But there was also a new feeling growing within her, a sense of empowerment, of having confronted injustice and helped set in motion changes that might benefit others. I think I might want to be a lawyer like Dad, she said suddenly as they reached the car. Her parents exchanged surprised glances. Really? Robert asked. I thought you were leaning toward medicine. I still am, kind of, Amara replied thoughtfully. But watching you these past few days, how you knew exactly what to do, how to make people listen, how to push for real change, it made me realize how important that kind of advocacy is. You could combine both, Tanya suggested. There's a growing field of health law and policy that addresses exactly these kinds of issues. Healthcare disparities, patient rights, medical ethics, maybe, Amara said, settling carefully into the backseat of the car. I've got time to figure it out. But I know one thing for sure. I'm not going to stay silent when I see something wrong, whether it happens to me or to someone else. Robert glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror, pride evident in his expression. That, sweetheart, is the most important lesson of all. As they drove away from Metropolitan General, none of them could know exactly what changes would come from their stand against discrimination. But they had set wheels in motion that wouldn't easily be stopped. A ripple effect that would extend far beyond one nurse, one patient, or even one hospital. Back at the hospital, Dr. Reynolds sat in her office reviewing Robert Johnson's recommendations and preparing to present them to the board. On her desk lay personnel files of other staff members with concerning patterns of behavior, survey data showing disparities in patient satisfaction across demographic groups, and draft policies for a new patient advocacy program. The road ahead would not be easy. Institutional change rarely was. There would be resistance, budget constraints, and the natural human tendency to maintain the status quo, but the evidence before her was compelling, the moral imperative clear, and the potential legal consequences of inaction significant. She picked up her phone and dialed Robert Johnson's number. Mr. Johnson, she said when he answered, I've been reviewing your recommendations in detail, and I'd like to discuss implementing them immediately, starting with the training program and reporting system. Would you be interested in serving as a consultant on our newly formed Equity and Healthcare Committee? In the car, Robert smiled at the invitation. I'd be honored, Dr. Reynolds. This is exactly the kind of meaningful follow-through we were hoping for. As they continued their drive home, Amara gazed out the window, reflecting on how a painful experience had transformed into something potentially powerful and positive. Her father had shown her that justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about creating systems that prevented harm in the first place. That was the kind of change that lasted, that mattered, that truly deserved to be called justice. And while Nurse Winters would face consequences for her actions, likely termination, and possibly loss of her nursing license. The greater victory lay in the reforms that would outlast any individual case. That was the real karma, transforming one family's suffering into protection for countless others who would never know their story, but would benefit from their stand against discrimination. "Are you okay?" Tanya asked, noticing her daughter's thoughtful expression. "Yeah," Amara replied with a small smile. "I'm actually better than okay. I'm ready to go home and heal, and then get back to living my life, maybe with a clearer purpose than before." As Metropolitan General Hospital receded in the distance behind them, Amara knew that her connection to it wasn't over. Whether through her father's new advisory role, her own potential future in healthcare or law, or simply through the changes their family had helped initiate, their impact would continue. And that knowledge, more than anything else, helped transform a story of discrimination and pain into one of empowerment, advocacy, and lasting change. 6 months had passed since Amara's appendectomy and the troubling events that followed. Spring had given way to summer and summer to autumn. The leaves outside the Johnson family home were turning brilliant shades of orange and red, a vibrant backdrop to a household that had settled back into its normal rhythms, with a few significant changes. Amara, now 16, had recovered fully from her surgery. The small scar on her abdomen had faded to a thin, silvery line, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. The emotional scars had taken longer to heal, but with the support of her family and a few sessions with a therapist who specialized in helping young people process experiences of discrimination, she had emerged from the ordeal with new resilience and purpose. On this crisp October morning, Amara stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her blouse and the hem of her blazer, professional attire that made her look older than her years. Today marked an important milestone. She would be speaking at Metropolitan General Hospital's official launch of their new Patient Equity Initiative, a comprehensive program that had grown directly from the recommendations her father had submitted 6 months earlier. "Are you nervous?" Tanya asked, appearing in the doorway of her daughter's room. "A little," Amara admitted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I've never spoken in front of so many people before. Dad says there might be press there too." "You'll do wonderfully," Tanya assured her, stepping into the room to help adjust her daughter's collar. "Just speak from the heart, like we practiced." Downstairs, Robert was reviewing some papers at the kitchen table, his coffee growing cold beside him. Since the incident at the hospital, he had taken on a formal role as a community advisor to Metropolitan General's newly formed Equity and Healthcare Committee, a position that required several hours of his time each month, but that he considered well worth the investment. The investigation into Nurse Winters had concluded swiftly and decisively. Faced with overwhelming evidence, not just from Amara's case but from multiple staff testimonies about a pattern of discriminatory behavior, the hospital had terminated her employment. The state nursing board, after conducting its own review, had placed her license on probationary status, requiring supervision and mandatory sensitivity training before she could practice again. But the Johnson family's impact had extended far beyond that single case of accountability. The hospital board, recognizing both the moral imperative and the potential liability of inaction, had approved funding for all 5 of Robert's recommended initiatives. First, a comprehensive anti-bias training program had been developed and implemented for all staff, from physicians to maintenance workers. Unlike the superficial diversity workshops of the past, this program was evidence-based, ongoing rather than one-time, and included specific modules on recognizing and addressing biases in medical care. Second, a new patient reporting system had been created, with multiple channels for registering concerns about care, including an anonymous hotline, a user-friendly online portal, and trained patient advocates available in person for those who preferred face-to-face conversations. Third, transparent investigation procedures had been established, with clear timelines and regular status updates provided to complainants. A diverse review committee, including community members, now oversaw these investigations to ensure fairness and thoroughness. Fourth, the hospital had begun conducting regular audits of patient outcomes and satisfaction scores, analyzing the data by race, ethnicity, gender, and other demographic factors to identify potential disparities. The first results had been eye-opening for hospital leadership, revealing patterns they had previously overlooked or dismissed. And fifth, perhaps most significantly, a patient advocacy board had been formed, with genuine authority to recommend policy changes and monitor their implementation. Robert served on this board alongside community leaders, healthcare experts, and former patients, including young people who could speak to the specific needs of adolescent patients. As the Johnson family drove to the hospital for the initiative launch, Amara reviewed her speaking notes one last time. She had been invited to share her story as part of the program's inauguration, not just her experience of discrimination, but how it had shaped her perspective and goals. "Remember," Robert said as they pulled into the hospital parking lot, "your story has already made a difference. Today is just about helping others understand why these changes matter." The hospital's main conference center had been transformed for the event. Banners proclaiming equity in healthcare, every patient, every time, hung from the walls. Tables were arranged with informational materials about the new initiatives. A diverse group of hospital staff, community members, and media representatives filled the seats. Dr. Reynolds, who had become an unexpected ally and friend to the Johnson family, greeted them warmly at the entrance. "I'm so glad you could all make it," she said. "Amara, are you ready for your part?" Amara nodded, her nervousness now mixed with determination. "I'm ready." The program began with remarks from the hospital CEO and board chair, followed by Dr. Reynolds explaining the specific components of the new equity initiative. Then it was Robert's turn to speak about the importance of community involvement in healthcare oversight. "Hospitals don't exist in isolation from the communities they serve," he told the audience. "They reflect our societal strengths and weaknesses, including our biases. True change requires partnership between healthcare providers and the diverse communities they treat." Finally, it was Amara's turn to take the podium. As she approached the microphone, she saw familiar faces in the crowd. Nurse David and Nurse Johnson, who had provided compassionate care during her hospital stay. Luis, the young orderly whose testimony had been crucial to the investigation and who was now enrolled in nursing school with a scholarship from the hospital's new Diversity in Healthcare Professions program. And Dr. Chen, who had taken a leading role in examining disparities in pain management practices throughout the hospital. Amara took a deep breath and began to speak. "6 months ago, I came to this hospital for what should have been a routine appendectomy," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Instead, I experienced discrimination that made a painful situation even worse. A healthcare professional who was supposed to care for me instead treated me differently because of the color of my skin. She ignored my pain, delayed my medication, and falsified my medical records." A hush fell over the room as she continued. "I could have left this hospital angry and hurt, telling everyone I knew to avoid Metropolitan General. My family could have filed a lawsuit and moved on. But we chose a different path, not just seeking accountability for one person's actions, but advocating for systemic changes that would protect all patients, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or background." She paused, looking out at the attentive faces before her. "What happened to me was wrong, but what has happened since gives me hope. In just 6 months, this hospital has implemented changes that medical centers across the country could learn from. Real anti-bias training, not just a checkbox exercise. Meaningful ways for patients to report problems, actual consequences when discrimination occurs. Regular review of data to find and fix disparities, and a patient advocacy board with real authority." Amara gestured toward her father and the other advocacy board members seated in the front row. "These changes matter because healthcare is literally a matter of life and death. Studies show that Black patients like me are less likely to receive adequate pain medication, less likely to have our symptoms taken seriously, and more likely to experience negative outcomes for the same conditions as white patients. That's not just unfair, it's dangerous." Several heads nodded in the audience, particularly among the medical professionals who were familiar with these research findings. "I'm 16 years old," Amara continued. "Before all this happened, I was thinking about becoming a doctor someday. That experience in this hospital could have discouraged me from pursuing medicine. Instead, it's made me more determined. I want to be part of creating healthcare systems where everyone receives equal treatment, where bias is acknowledged and addressed, and where patients like me don't have to wonder if they're receiving substandard care because of how they look." She looked directly at Dr. Reynolds. And the hospital leadership team, what you're launching today isn't just a program or an initiative. It's a commitment to treating every patient with dignity and providing the highest standard of care to everyone who walks through your doors. It's about recognizing that good intentions aren't enough. We need systems and accountability to ensure equitable care. Amara's voice grew stronger as she concluded, "My experience at this hospital started with pain and discrimination, but it's ending with progress and hope. The changes you've made here prove that institutions can learn, grow, and become better when they listen to the communities they serve. That's the real victory, not just for me or my family, but for every patient who will receive better care because of these reforms." As Amara stepped away from the podium, the room erupted in applause. Dr. Reynolds approached with tears in her eyes and embraced the young woman. "Thank you," she whispered. "Your courage has transformed this institution in ways that will benefit patients for years to come." After the formal program concluded, many attendees approached the Johnson family to express their appreciation and share their own stories. A reporter from the local newspaper requested an interview with Amara for a feature story on youth activism and healthcare reform. A state health official mentioned interest in adopting similar equity initiatives across all public hospitals in the state. Perhaps most meaningful was the approach of an elderly black woman who gently took Amara's hand. "I've been coming to this hospital for 40 years, she said, her eyes wise with experience. "I've seen how things used to be, and I've felt that different treatment myself many times but never knew how to name it or challenge it. What you and your family have done here matters, child. It matters more than you may ever know." As the event wound down, Luis approached with exciting news of his own. "The scholarship program is amazing," he told them. "I'm able to attend nursing school full-time now, and there are 20 other students from underrepresented backgrounds in the program with me. In a few years, the hospital staff will look a lot more like the community it serves." On their way out, they passed a wall near the hospital entrance that hadn't been there during Amara's stay. It displayed the hospital's new patient bill of rights in multiple languages, along with clear instructions for reporting concerns about care. A diverse team of patient advocates staffed a welcome desk nearby, available to help anyone who needed support navigating the healthcare system. "This is what real change looks like," Robert observed. "Not just words on paper, but tangible systems and resources that shift the balance of power and give patients a voice." In the car on the way home, Amara was quiet, processing the emotions of the day. Finally, she spoke. "You know what I realized today? Nurse Winters probably thought she had all the power in that hospital room. She could ignore my call button, delay my medication, treat me differently than other patients, and in that moment she did have power over me." Her parents listened attentively as she continued. "But in the end, we had the greater power, not just to get her fired, but to change the whole system. That's what people miss when they think about justice. It's not just about punishing one person for doing wrong. It's about fixing the conditions that allowed that wrong to happen in the first place." Tanya reached back to squeeze her daughter's hand. "That's a profound insight, Amara. Not many adults understand that, let alone teenagers." "I've had some good teachers," Amara said with a smile at her parents. That evening, as Robert checked his email, he found a message from Dr. Reynolds with an unexpected update. 3 other hospitals in the region had reached out to Metropolitan General, requesting information about their equity initiatives, interested in implementing similar programs. The ripple effects were spreading beyond what any of them had anticipated. He shared the news with his family as they gathered for dinner. "So it's not just one hospital changing," Amara said thoughtfully. "Ing down the hallway, the confrontation thatly, it could be many." "That's how meaningful change often works," Robert explained. "It starts with a single case, a single stand against injustice. Then others see what's possible and follow that example. Before long, what seemed like an isolated incident has sparked a movement." "Do you think Nurse Winters knows about all this?" Amara asked suddenly. "About how her actions led to all these positive changes?" "I don't know," Tanya answered honestly. "But in a way, it doesn't matter. This isn't about her anymore. It's about all the patients who will receive better care because of the standards and systems now in place." Amara nodded, serving herself another helping of dinner. "I'm thinking about starting a student group at school," she said casually, "for teens interested in healthcare equity and advocacy. Ms. Garcia, my biology teacher, said she'd be willing to sponsor it." Her parents exchanged proud glances. Their daughter had taken a painful experience and transformed it into a catalyst for growth, not just for the hospital, but for herself as well. "That sounds like a wonderful idea," Robert said. "And speaking of advocacy, the patient board is looking for a youth representative. It's a big commitment. Monthly meetings, reviewing policies, speaking with administrators. But if you're interested," Amara's eyes lit up. "Really? They'd consider someone my age?" "They specifically want someone your age," Robert confirmed. "Young patients have unique perspectives and needs that adults often overlook. Your voice would be valuable." As the conversation continued, touching on school projects, upcoming community events, and plans for the weekend, the hospital experience that had once dominated their family discussions had taken its proper place. Not forgotten, but integrated into their lives as a significant chapter, rather than an all-consuming crisis. Later that night, as Amara prepared for bed, she paused to look at the small scar on her abdomen, the physical reminder of an experience that had changed her in ways far deeper than the surgical incision. She traced the faint line with her finger, remembering the pain, the fear, and the anger she had felt in that hospital room. But the scar represented something else now too. Resilience, advocacy, and the power of speaking up against injustice. In a strange way, she had come to see it as a badge of honor, a mark of what she had endured and the positive change that had come from it. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Chen. "Saw your speech today. Incredibly powerful. 3 medical students asked me afterward how they could get involved with healthcare equity work. You're making waves, Amara." She smiled as she typed a reply, then set her phone on the nightstand and turned out the light. Tomorrow was a school day, and she had a biology test to prepare for, a history paper due by the end of the week, and plans to draft a mission statement for her new student advocacy group. Life had moved forward as it always does. The painful experience at Metropolitan General would always be part of her story, but it was no longer the defining chapter. Instead, it had become the catalyst for a new direction, one focused on creating change rather than dwelling on past hurts. As she drifted toward sleep, Amara reflected on the strange, unexpected journey of the past 6 months. A routine surgery had exposed her to the harsh reality of discrimination in healthcare, but it had also revealed her own strength, her family's unwavering support, and the possibility of transforming systems that many considered too entrenched to change. Nurse Winters had indeed faced karma for her actions, not just in losing her job and having her license restricted, but in the knowledge that her behavior had sparked reforms that would prevent others from following in her footsteps. The real victory wasn't in her punishment, but in the positive changes that had emerged from a situation she had created through her prejudice and unprofessional conduct. Across town, in her office at Metropolitan General Hospital, Dr. Reynolds was still working late, reviewing applications for the hospital's new diversity recruitment initiative. On her desk sat a framed quote that she had placed there after the Johnson case was resolved. "Justice is what love looks like in public." It reminded her daily that true healthcare required not just medical expertise but a commitment to treating every patient with equal dignity and respect. The hospital was not perfect, no institution is, but it was evolving in meaningful ways. Complaint reports were down by 30%. Patient satisfaction scores among minority populations had risen significantly. Staff members were actively engaged in conversations about bias and equity that would have been unimaginable a year earlier, and it had all begun with one teenage girl who refused to accept discriminatory treatment as inevitable, and one family who knew how to transform an individual injustice into systemic change. In the quiet darkness of her bedroom, Amara finally surrendered to sleep, dreaming not of hospital rooms and painful recoveries, but of future possibilities, medical school, perhaps, or law school focusing on healthcare policy, or some combination of advocacy and healing that she had yet to fully envision. The journey that had begun with discrimination had led to transformation, not just for Metropolitan General Hospital, but for everyone involved in the story. A nurse had faced the consequences of her prejudice. A hospital had confronted its systemic failures and begun the hard work of reform. A family had turned pain into purpose, and a young woman had discovered her voice and her power to create change in the world around her. It wasn't a fairy tale ending where all problems were solved forever. Discrimination in healthcare remained a reality that many patients would continue to face. But in one hospital, for countless future patients who would never know Amara's name or story, care would be more equitable, dignity more assured, and justice more accessible because of the stand she and her family had taken. That was the true karma, not merely punishment for wrongdoing, but the creation of a better, more just system rising from the ashes of individual injustice. It was a legacy that would outlast any single case, any one career, any particular moment in time. And for Amara Johnson, just beginning to discover her place in the world, it was only the beginning.